Any moment now, a decision from Judge Juan Merchan on the argument coming in fast and furiously from the defense team in Donald Trump's criminal trial. They have asked for a mistrial to be declared over Stormy Daniels' testimony. An intense back and forth has been taking place between both sides after a day that saw the conclusion of dramatic testimony from the woman at the heart of all of this, Stormy Daniels. Over 7 hours of testimony describing her 2006 encounter with the ex-president and the hush money payment she was paid to keep the story of their encounter silent. Stormy Daniels pushed back against contentious questioning from Trump's lawyers, New York Times calling her, quote, the most intense witness they've experienced so far. And while the witness following her may not have been the most intense, she gets to the heart of the crime at the center of the trial, the keeping of business records. Rebecca Minocchio, an employee of the Trump Organization's bookkeeping department, testified about mailing Trump checks to sign while he was the president of the United States of America. This junior bookkeeper worked for Alan Weisselberg for 8 years. She explained how she would send FedExes of blank checks to Washington, D.C. for the then president to sign, and then after he signed them, they would be mailed back to her. She describes how first Keith Schiller and then John McEntee were the recipients of the check she sent, and notably that they both used their home addresses rather than the White House address. Another witness on the stand this afternoon to take note of, Madeleine Westerhout. She was Trump's personal assistant. She was also known as his gatekeeper for a while. Westerhout's desk was right outside the Oval Office while Donald Trump was president. She filled in a lot of the details about how the Trump administration worked. She affirmed what we heard from the bookkeeper. Question from the prosecution: did you ever see Mr. Trump sign checks in his office? Westerhout: sometimes, yes. Question: did Mr. Trump sign each check by hand? Answer: to my knowledge, yes. As to why hearing about the back and forth of Trump signing these checks is so important, so central, the repayments he made to Michael Cohen, which he signed in this manner, are at the center of the 34 felony charges against him. Just a few moments ago, Judge Merchan denied Donald Trump's second request for a mistrial. It's where we start the hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Outside the courthouse for us, NBC News correspondent Yasmin Vesuvian. Also joining us, former acting assistant attorney general for national security at the Department of Justice and MSNBC legal analyst Mary McCord is here. With us at the table, MSNBC legal analyst and a former criminal division deputy chief at the Southern District of New York, Christy Greenberg, is back, and former top official at the Department of Justice, MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissmann is still with us. That was a live picture of Donald Trump talking. We did not listen because it's never clear to us if he's going to smear a witness, violate the gag order, threaten someone, so we monitor it and listen to it so you don't have to. If anything newsworthy happened, we'll tell you about it. Yasmin, I start with you.
The judge denying this motion for a mistrial, Nicole, and he mentioned in his lead up to delivering that decision about how he went back to his chambers Tuesday afternoon after hearing some of Stormy Daniels' testimony and reviewed the testimony, because that was when we initially heard about this motion for a mistrial after returning from our lunch break. And he talked about how he felt as if some of the details in there should not have been included. Questions asked, for instance, about whether the former president had used a condom, and he wished, in fact, that the witness had not answered those questions. However, he went on to talk about, he brought up Todd Blanche's opening statements, opening remarks. And in these opening remarks, Todd Blanche denies the fact that a sexual encounter occurred between Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump. And so that is one of the reasons why he says, it seems, the people's attorney had to talk about the details of that evening in 2006 after they met at that celebrity golf tournament, because it was those details from Stormy Daniels and her account which directly contradicts the opening statement from Todd Blanche. And it was necessary to pit the two of them against each other for the jury to decide, do we believe Stormy Daniels' recount of what happened on that evening back in 2006, or do we believe Todd Blanche's account and or Donald Trump's account of what happened back on that evening in 2006? Hence the reason why this judge now has denied this motion for a mistrial. It was expected he was going to deny this motion for a mistrial. And he again, Nicole, chided Todd Blanche and the defense attorney, saying there were many instances in which you could have objected throughout her testimony in which you did not. You and I talked about this yesterday. There was a moment in which Judge Juan Merchan on Tuesday said sustained to his own objection in a moment in which he felt as if the defense attorneys should have provided an objection. And so here today, he has now denied this motion. He has now denied an amendment to a gag order as well, in which the former president and his attorneys asked for the former president to be able to respond publicly to some of the testimony from Stormy Daniels, saying you cannot attack witnesses because it's not just about Stormy Daniels, but it is also about intimidating possible future witnesses that may in fact take the stand, Nicole. So now 5 o'clock, court is in recess until tomorrow morning.
Yasmin, does it change the calculation about whether Trump testifies?
I don't necessarily think so, because I think what many people have been saying, I mean, every time Andrew comes out of the court, I pull him aside and say, Andrew, what do you think? And now you have him at your table. But I mean, I think the likelihood of Donald Trump testifying is fairly low, although Donald Trump could very well take the stand and defend himself, right, and deny the fact that he had a relationship, a sexual encounter with Stormy Daniels. But the risk, right, outweighs what the positives are in his testimony. And so whether or not the former president takes the stand, I think, is really up to his defense attorneys and himself. But I don't necessarily think him being able to weigh in publicly on Stormy Daniels' testimony is going to be included in the calculation as to whether or not he takes the stand.
I mean, I think that's right, Andrew, legally. I just wonder if we've passed the point where Trump is engaged in a legal undertaking.
Look, there is a possibility that he says, you know what, I'm throwing caution to the wind, and he does what he did in the second E. Jean Carroll case and says, I'm a better lawyer than anyone. You would think after paying $80 million from after that, you might think maybe you're not. And Joe Tacopina would have been a better choice than yourself. He does have 3 lawyers who are going to put their bodies in front of that and say it is the worst possible thing. I think the reason I just think it is, if you are the state, you are licking your chops at this. And it's better for them to just go with a sort of, you didn't prove your case. I have to say that is a hard argument, because what I was just thinking about at the end of today in our discussion in the last hour is, when you close, as Christy knows, when you're the state, one of the things you say is, what is the narrative that is consistent with all of this evidence? And we know the narrative from the state. Can anyone sit here, like Yasmin, 3 of you, say, what is the story that's consistent with the proof that we know, the hard proof and the softer proof from witnesses? There is no narrative that has been presented that explains it, other than what the state has said. But if Donald Trump testifies, I mean, it's always possible, but, that is going to be, there will be a guilty verdict at that point.
I want to read some of what Yasmin's talking about, Christy, to you. Judge Merchan says, in going back to the opening statements, Mr. Blanche, in your opening statement, you denied that there was ever a sexual encounter between Stormy Daniels and your client. Your denial puts the jury in the position of having to choose who they believe. Donald Trump, who claims there was no encounter, or Stormy, who claims that there was. And though the people don't have to prove the sexual encounter, they do have to show her credibility, which immediately came under attack in your opening statements. The more specificity she can provide, the more the jury can weigh whether they believe her account of the encounter. So not only is he denying the mistrial, not only is he not giving Trump leeway to attack her, he's saying that the specificity, the small details, are central to any witness's credibility.
And they really were here. And they also really explain why it is that the hush money payment, why Donald Trump would have been motivated to make that hush money payment in the first place, or have Michael Cohen make it, right? Because this was so damning, and the details are so embarrassing and so lurid. The details about Melania, and that he said, we don't sleep in the same bedroom, the details about, you remind me of my daughter, and he's, trying to get her a spot on a reality TV show in order to sleep with her. Like, they are just cringeworthy, and I think that was the reason that you would be motivated to make sure they didn't get out before the election. That said, with respect to this mistrial motion, there were some details I do think the state should not have elicited. There were certain details that did seem to suggest that this was getting close to the line of a sexual assault. The question about the height differential, it's not clear to me why that was relevant. The questions about him blocking the way and being bigger than her, sort of leaving a suggestion there, though she didn't say it, that she wouldn't have been able to leave easily. There was a question about, did you say no? And she said, at no point did I say no. He said, why? And then on direct, her response was, well, I didn't say anything, which again sort of left it out there of, did she feel she couldn't? And so consent is not an issue here. Sexual assault is not part of this case at all. And that is more prejudicial and inflammatory and serious than the falsified business records that he's charged with. That said, so what I was looking for today is this going to get cleaned up on redirect by the state? Because some of this, I think, could be an issue on appeal later. And I actually think it got cleaned up on cross by Donald Trump's own lawyer. At one point, she asks the question, and I'm not going to get this precisely right, but, what about his actions made you feel like you couldn't say no? Something to that effect. And she responded, it wasn't his actions, it was my insecurities that led me to go through with it. And that was just such a moment of, and then she elaborated and said, he never physically threatened me. He never verbally threatened me. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't drug me. And she goes through this whole litany of, of the circumstances of why she did what she did. And it was very plain at that point. She was not accusing him of any kind of assault. And she really was talking about being in a situation that was extremely uncomfortable for her. And I thought it humanized her. I thought it was really important testimony it was a very powerful moment for her. And most importantly, to the judge's point, it was credible. It seemed very credible, like somebody in that situation coming out of a bathroom and seeing somebody in their boxers, like she was shocked and she didn't really know how to behave. And so I really thought that the mistrial arguments that there's been confusion about this prejudice, I think they fell flat based on the Trump's defense's arguments today.